The decisions we make shape who we become, but in sports, many of those decisions happen so quickly, we aren't aware of them. They can feel outside of our control. Why did I throw a certain pass? Why did I swing at a certain pitch? Obviously, some of us are better at this than others, but why do some athletes make such good split-second decisions? One company is at the forefront of this question. S2 Cognition works with all the major sports leagues, the MLB, the NFL, NBA, and NHL, helping teams evaluate how an athlete's mind works. I had a chance to take the test and sit down with Dr. Scott Wylie, the neuroscientist who co-founded S2 Cognition. Scott was a research and faculty member for the University of Virginia, Vanderbilt, and the University of Louisville. He's published over 50 peer-reviewed papers and chapters on the brain, split-second decision-making, and motor impulses. We talked about speeded cognition, how an athlete's mind works, how a human's visual processing and systems work, the minutia within the 400 milliseconds of baseball, and so much more. This was truly one of the most interesting conversations I've ever had. And now, my conversation with Dr. Scott Wylie. Dr. Wylie, what is the difference between intelligence and cognition?
It's a great question. I would frame it as cognition is kind of a broad umbrella term for how we take in information, make sense of that information, from sensing it, perceiving it, making decisions about it, deciding to store it, to remember it, to pay attention to it, to make complex decisions with that information. So it really encompasses all the different ways that we make sense of our external world, integrate that with our internal thoughts and ideas, and then arrive at conclusions, arrive at actions. So it's an all-encompassing term. When we start diving into cognition, there are different layers and different levels of understanding cognition. So Brandon and I here at S2, for the first vast majority of our career, worked in academic medical centers. And one of our clinical obligations centered around characterizing and assessing cognitive changes that accompany a range of neurological and neurodegenerative conditions, like detecting memory loss, cognitive deficits associated with Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, stroke effects, head injury effects. And so we're sampling we're using tools to get at kind of everyday sorts of thinking skills, what we might call generalized cognitive abilities. You walk into a grocery store and you walk out, you got to remember where you parked your car. You go to order a burger at Five Guys, you got to remember your order and your buddy's order, and you're using your memory. You're taking in information. So everyday sorts of thinking skills, and we assess that to see how someone might have difficulties in everyday life. When you get to intelligence, you're looking at how people generally reason and solve problems, and there's a lot of abstract thinking, how they navigate verbal information, spatial information. And so something like intelligence covers the landscape of everyday sorts of thinking, particularly when you have the benefit of time, when you have the ability to reason and sit and process and cogitate about a solution. So again, intelligence, cognition at one level is concerned with those kind of everyday sorts of generalized thinking and reasoning skills that we all use to navigate our day-to-day lives. Very different than what athletes are doing. When athletes have sub-second, sub-half-second time frames to process, make decisions, control their actions and reactions. And that's a very different set of networks you're engaging, very different set of tools you need to capture those fast processing, the extreme ends of human processing.
Yeah. I'm sure you're familiar with Daniel Kahneman, system 1, system 2 type thinking. Just for those that maybe aren't, Daniel Kahneman, very famous scientist, won a Nobel Prize. System 1 being those automatic, effortless tasks, very quick things that happen without us consciously thinking of them. System 2 being reasoning, right? So if I asked you 2 plus 2, that's system 1. Automatic, 4. System 2 would be 24 times 17. Okay, I got to sit, I got to think through, carry this, carry that, right? I'm curious, with S2, is it looking into system 1 for athletes in a way? And I'm generalizing a lot here. Maybe there's a system 3 that is, athletic, and you guys can run with that from a marketing standpoint if you like. I won't hold anything against you. But is there like a system 3 for athletes that's the speeded cognition? Is any of that relative here? Because I just love the way that he breaks that down and makes it so easy for a large audience to digest. But of course, I don't want to generalize if it's not accurate.
Yeah. No, and again, that's a very broad partitioning of the cognitive space. So these fast, automatic, effortless, like you said, there's lots of terms that have been used. These are subconscious, attention demanding versus require very little attention so that you can devote your attention elsewhere, versus these slower, more deliberate ways of processing and handling information. I think when you're talking about elite athletes on the field, they're doing a little bit of both. May not be the kind of reasoning that you would sit down and solve a differential equation, but they're definitely engaged in deliberate, intentional, top-down assessment, things like anticipation, things like instinctively noticing information, picking up, making adjustments to your approach. Those are kind of top-down. And so you're definitely engaging these fast processing systems that operate to handle things in the sub-half-second timescales. But you also have these systems that are monitoring performance and recognizing when you make a mistake or make an error, or what you're about to do isn't going to solve, provide a helpful solution because something unexpectedly changed, or the play breaks down and you've got to improvise. And so there's an element of this fast processing, but it also is controlled at some level by higher order ability to intervene, redirect, shift at a moment's notice.
Yeah, I mean, they're all working in unison in a way, right? I mean, I want to walk through the stages of baseball because I think it's just a great representation. I mean, there's so much happening in that minutia, right? I'm fascinated by the most valuable 400 milliseconds in sports. There's nothing that compares to it, right? Less than half a second. And if you're good in that 400 milliseconds, maybe we could say good in the 200 milliseconds because there's a reaction time and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
You can make millions. If you're not, then you're with the rest of us. As I think through that pitch sequence, you can see where all those systems are working together, right, in a certain way. So you have a pitcher who's maybe reasoning through and communicating with a catcher as to what they're going to throw next, and that maybe is different than the speeded cognition that you guys are measuring. And then, of course, the pitcher releases it, and there's this chain of events that I want to walk through with you. But I guess, is it accurate to say that all of that is maybe separate from IQ and kind of the original way people would measure intelligence?
Yeah, for sure. I think where IQ probably comes into play is helping you understand maybe broad learning efficiencies among individuals. So we know that folks who on traditional intelligence tests absorb information, can handle complex information and schemes and concepts more readily. It's absorbed easier. They can utilize that. So I think when you're talking about approach, you're talking about concepts that you're engaging and trying to absorb and learn and understand before you even step on the field. That's where IQ probably lends some helpful insights. It tells you something important about how they absorb off the field, but then when you put them on the field, obviously you're using some of those structures that you've absorbed and learned and concepts, but but you don't have the time to think at that level. Things are just way too fast. And so you're using that to create a scaffolding, but then within those frameworks, you're having to deploy your attention, broaden it, sharpen it, focus it, shift it. You're having to reconcile discrepancies in what you see. You're having to navigate your expectancies, things you're anticipating that happen or don't happen, and then control all of your actions and reactions with this unbelievable level of precision and speed.
Yeah, I mean, the Wonderlic would be maybe an example on the athletic front of an IQ test, right? That seemed very much IQ-like from my understanding.
Yeah, very much so. It's correlated with broad measures of intelligence. It's a paper and pencil bubble sheet task. I think my understanding and reading of the history was that the intention was great, trying to capture something about how these athletes take in information, are going to make decisions on the field. The problem is that level of understanding cognition is not the level that you see on Sunday afternoons. It's just not going to capture the same dynamic processing cognitive systems that are happening when the ball snapped.
Yeah, maybe gives you an insight as to remembering plays, like studying a playbook, but that's only going to take you so far. And you mentioned the history, IQ tests have kind of a dark history. They very similarly started with good intentions. Alfred Binet in France, he built the test for kids to identify learning disabilities. Then it became the standardized test with Stanford, I believe. It was a Stanford professor.
Yeah.
Then
Stanford
the Army
Binet,
started using it to classify recruits, and you got eugenics. And I didn't even know this, but you had forced sterilization in certain states in our own country here in the United States. Virginia, I think it was, passed a law that said we could sterilize based on IQ tests. So, I mean, again,
a lot of dark history there.
Yeah, dark history. It started, I think, with good intentions, and then it got some inertia into some dangerous areas. And fortunately, we realized that a lot of that just didn't make sense. In a multitude of ways. Even if you were trying to sterilize and make a smarter population, that just it didn't make sense. But I think it brings up this question of the different levels and systems that go into being an athlete and intelligence, and kind of highlights that complexity in a way. And for me, it brings up this question of what is a genius? We think of a genius as someone in school who can just kind of remember all these types of things. We don't maybe think of that guy that for whatever reason just makes all the right plays.
Yeah. There's a concept, Garner's multiple intelligences, and he argued that the intelligence that we capture in traditional ways with IQ-based tests does not capture the intelligence of a concert pianist or a musician or an athlete. And there's something really appealing, especially as we start to look in to the cognitive systems of these elite athletes. They're wired to do things that few human beings can do. Our understanding of the limits, the boundaries of how fast we can process, see things that are happening at, a few tens of milliseconds is shifting, because these athletes are demonstrating that there are human beings out there that are just unbelievably skilled in these fast, dynamic processing that's required to play. I think one of the most interesting and rewarding aspects, when we first got started, we worked with LSU's football program. That was our entry into sports. And we were a couple of geeky scientists working at Vanderbilt. And we had a connection to Tommy Moffitt, who's the strength and conditioning coach at LSU. He's now at Texas A&M, but he's kind of a godfather of strength and conditioning. And Brandon ran track in college, and he was his strength and conditioning coach. And he called him up and said, "Hey, I think we can give you insight into these cognitive instincts, and the different ways these athletes are wired." And they said, "Man, we see everything." come down and test. And so we went down and made a presentation, went back, tested their 109-man roster. And what was fascinating, one of the earliest comments was, this guy here absolutely crushed your evaluation. Tell me about this athlete. And we talked about how his brain is just built for this fast, dynamic processing. And they said he is probably one of the athletes who struggles the most academically. For, they didn't get into the reasons, but he struggles in the classroom. And he's barely cutting it academically and has always, struggled with academics, but when he crosses that line, his brain comes to life. And that was just a reminder. And it was easy for us to say, yeah, because he's not using the same systems. He's using an entirely different way of processing and handling information. And those are different than what you use in an academic setting, different than what you use when you're performing an IQ test.
Totally. And I think, again, anybody who's played sports can think of those guys, and it comes in a multitude of ways. There's guys that are just great at, just when they lock in, they can just do something, whether it's hitting a baseball or catching a pass. And then there's guys that just are so predictive. I was always blown away at defenders in basketball that would just kind of know where I was going to go before I wanted them to. And, they would just read my crossover, which worked very well up until like ninth grade. And then all of a sudden, these guys that at the next highest level I started playing against, they were just there. So I want to understand how you guys came to create this test. I never actually asked Brandon how you guys created this test and really how it evolved into the leader of athletic cognition that all these major sports leagues are interested in.
Yeah, it's not a really sexy story. We both been sports. I played a little baseball, and that's the extent to which I'll brag about it in college. And Brandon was a track athlete, so we've always been in a sport. Played lots of sports in high school, so we love sports. We're at Vanderbilt, and I had walked down the hall and talked to him after the 2014 NFL draft, and we started just musing about the terms that the commentators were using to describe athletes. Wow, he's got a nose for the ball. Man, he plays faster than his foot speed. Oh, he's got great field vision. And we just kind of shook our head and said, they're still using the Wonderlic, this paper and pencil bubble sheet. And that's not intended to capture these terms, these concepts. And if you're in sports, you kind of know what these concepts mean. And so we sat down and just outside of our day jobs, we met for coffee and started whiteboarding. Look, we don't have to reinvent the wheel here. We've got this vast literature from the cognitive sciences, from the cognitive neurosciences, where these tasks that are incredibly precise and capable of identifying these individual differences in these fast processing, from visual process, ways you process visual information in your scenes, to how you dynamically use your memory, to timing systems and impulse control systems, how fast you can stop when something suddenly happens and you got to abort what you're about to do. We've got tools and methods that can capture these. And in our labs, we would do some pretty cool, fancy stuff with brain imaging, and we put electrodes on your scalp, and we could measure signals that are generated in the brain that propagate through the skull and to the through your skin, and you could pick up and kind of link brain activity to these cognitive skills. I had the good fortune of doing a lot of research with neurosurgeons, and particularly in movement disorders, Parkinson's disease. And one of the treatments is putting a wire deep into these brain structures that we think are critically involved in controlling your movements. And they would be awake during these surgeries, and we'd have them holding these response devices and making these quick button presses, going, stopping, timing their movements. And we were trying to link these decisions, these rapid, fast processing decisions, to the underlying neural circuitries and areas of the brain that we think were involved. So really cool stuff. The tasks themselves, though, are incredibly rich. And so we sat down, and we've got colleagues who are experts in very specific areas around the world that we've worked with, and we we pooled together and assembled the best tools from the cognitive sciences and said, look, if we have any shot of helping athletes and coaches understand how each person is uniquely wired to process the things they do well, and then the potential bottlenecks or sources of inconsistency, this is going to be our best first effort. We can improve upon just general IQ.
So how did that test then evolve? I mean, was it, you started with like one of them and you worked with the LSU football team and you built out this battery. And so the viewers know, I actually took the test. This would have been 6 months back. And as we maybe talk through this, I'll show some visuals of what the different tests look like just to give people an idea. But I'm curious how it evolved to that point. Was it we did more research into each piece of cognition and we built out this battery one by one, or was it largely the initial battery is still the same today?
No, I think this is an important point that I think is really important. Unlike an IQ test or most personality tests, the concussion tests, it's the same test irrespective of your sport. That didn't make sense to us because what a hitter's doing in the batter's box is very different cognitively than what a middle linebacker's doing or a point guard's doing on the basketball court. And so we thought it was more important to really tailor the evaluation to the most important cognitive demands that an athlete is engaging and challenged by in their respective sport. Pitchers, for example, they're in control. Our pitcher evaluation looks more like our golf evaluation, our NFL punter and kicker evaluation. They're initiating. There's a rhythm component. There's a focus component. So those evaluations really center on the cognitive dynamics that your sport and sometimes within position demands. And that to us was really critical and really important was to iron in. And so some of it was a conceptual, theoretical exercise in the beginning. We fashioned an evaluation. Quarterbacks got to, most sports have to have good impulse control. When you behave prematurely, hastily, when you force things, that usually leads to bad outcomes in a lot of situations. So that's got to be important for a quarterback. It's also got to be important for a hitter. They get expressed differently, but your ability to control strong reflex-like impulses. And then we took these batteries to the sports experts, coaches, former players, and said, help us kind of shape this and fine-tune this. And then it was a data collection effort to identify, hey, are we getting some signal from these tasks, and which tasks are most important in revealing and helping coaches and players better understand how they should train, how they fit into systems, what is their cognitive style at their position, what can you expect, what can you not expect them to do well. So that was kind of the construction project.
Gotcha. And it very much, to me felt like almost a gamified reaction test of sorts. And I'm sure it's not just a reaction test to you guys, but it felt like a gamified reaction test where speed was important, but accuracy was also important. That was the gamified piece of it. It wasn't just hit this button as fast as you can. But, I'm curious, and this is something I didn't get to talk too much with Brandon about either, is the difference between athletes and non-athletes with this cognition. I mean, how different was an athlete versus a non-athlete as you guys began to build this out and, look into it further?
Yeah, that's a great question, because you would assume that athletes react faster than non-athletes. And if you really survey the scientific literature, it's pretty clear that it's a mixed set of findings. Athletes compared to non-athletes, top athletes compared to amateur athletes, they're usually things like simple reaction time. You see something, you react, or even a basic two-choice reaction time. If you see A, do X. If you see B, do Y. Those reaction speeds, which can range from simple as in the upper 180 to 200 millisecond range, A basic two choice is probably in the 250 to 350 millisecond range. Those basic, just see something, react to it, usually don't disclose differences between athletes and non-athletes. And what we've published a few papers and there's other researchers out there that have argued this point. It's not these basic, simple reactions that distinguish elite athletes. It's all these systems that are engaged to protect your reactions and to make your reactions more dynamic, adaptable, and flexible when things are changing rapidly. So your ability to control impulses, your ability to make counter reactions, your ability to stop, redirect, adapt your timing when things slow down, speed up. Those systems that are largely governed by the frontal lobes of your brain right behind your forehead, those are the systems that where you start to really identify differences between athletes and non-athletes. Between the best athletes bring a lot more of those flexible, dynamic cognitive systems than those who might struggle. And that makes sense. When you're facing Kershaw and Scherzer, you need every advantage you can get. Milliseconds matter. That tug of war for time between the pitcher and the hitter, you need to be able to, if you can recognize what pitch it is, 15, 20 milliseconds sooner.
Without a trash can?
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. That's at the extreme ends of processing. That's when you start to really see the evidence that when you're wired to process at those speeds, that's where you're going to have an advantage.
Yeah. And I guess to give people an insight here. So I reached out to S2 originally because I was blown away by, what I was reading about it. I was so interested in it. I really want to avoid the brain Olympics, type jargon here because, that's a slippery slope. But I was really interested in the brain science of athletes. And I read actually some of your papers that I think really stood out to me. There's one study that looked into looking for guys who see fast. And the results showed that MLB hitters, I think in the higher cognition group, walked more frequently. They struck out less. They struck out less on breaking pitches. They had less swing and miss results. It basically just showed that the hitters who had higher S2 scores, it was highly correlated with their performance on the field. Additionally, there was another study how MLB All-Stars are wired differently. A number of All-Stars who took the S2 test were examined, including players like Aaron Judge, Adley Rutschman, Bo Bichette, and many others. And the study found that these All-Stars were significantly better in comparison to everyday starters and reserves. For comparison, their S2 scores were 88 on the scale to 100, whereas the everyday starters were 69 and the reserves were 57. So large differences there in their overarching S2 score. What is going on there?
Yeah. I'll get right to that. I might step back just one step or a half step and this accumulation of data is what we were after. We've now tested probably 2,600 professional hitters over the last several years, and it's a waiting game. We're tracking players who we test as minor leaguers who make it to the big leagues, and we're up to about 450 players who made it to the big leagues from the minors, who we tested in the minors, and then what do their scores look like? Just making it, right? There's lots of different ways that our analytics are being leveraged, and we're interested in a lot of different questions. But one general question is, the guys make the big leagues, do they look differently from a cognitive perspective? And we have an overall cognitive measure, which is kind of an unweighted average of all of your specific cognitive skills, like instinctive learning and impulse control and perception speed, how fast you process visual details. And higher scores just tell you they're bringing a lot more dynamic systems to the table. Lower scores means these are potential areas of inconsistency. Doesn't mean the systems don't work. It doesn't mean they can't process. It just means when those systems are maximally taxed in a situation, even on a particular pitch, that's going to be a source of inconsistency for you. What we have found with these 440 big leaguers is that 83% of this sample score north of the 60th percentile. So our scale goes from 1 to 99, with 50th percentile being the median. More than 50% score north of the 80th percentile. And
is percentile for baseball players, or is it everyone?
Yes, compared to professional baseball players.
Okay.
So that's our reference data set. So they're being compared against each other, the guys they competed with in the minor leagues and across the levels. But our question is, when you take everybody who's made it in professional baseball and then you're looking to see those who make it to the big leagues, are they wired differently? And over 26% score higher than the 90th percentile. It's 6% score at the 98th and 99th percentile. And to put that in perspective, 5% score below the 30th percentile. Only 5% of this sample score below the 30th percentile. You got a higher percentage scoring at the 98th and 99th percentile. It's remarkable. And they all get there a little bit differently, but the guys that are scoring with a high overall S2, they just have lots of high areas they're bringing. So they have a lot of tools at their disposal. So it could be the way they process the visual, what pitch is it, where it moves in space, their timing systems. Impulse control has been connected analytically to chase rates. And so every pitch out of the hand, unless you're 3-0 hard taking, or you're going to watch the first pitch, or there's a steal on and you're going to take it. Every pitch out of the hand creates an impulse. The brain starts processing the visual details and going from a general state of motor readiness to swing that you achieve during your load to a very specific swing solution, developing a very specific bat path. And there's opportunities to make some small adjustments, but that activation of a swing solution is an impulse to react. And hitters who are able to kind of hold that back a tick longer and reserve that chase less. And consequently, hitters that have lower impulse control chase more. And so that becomes really important when we look at these all-stars. Their average score is in the mid 70s, and so their ability, this is one of the highest scores that these all-stars possess, is the ability to be patient, be disciplined, hold their motor system back. Again, we're talking about just a few tens of milliseconds advantage, and that turns out to be considerably important.
Yeah, I mean, you can think of where impulse control, maybe carries over into everyday life. This guy honked at me and threw his hand out the window yesterday, and I had low impulse control.
Yeah. It gets the best of us. The conditions are right.
I laid on the horn for like 4 or 5 seconds. There was a fire truck that made me get over, and I just couldn't hold myself back. But if I remember right, the impulse control test was the arrows, right?
No, it's the blue and orange circles.
The blue and orange circles. That's right.
Seemingly simple task where you're just making decisions based on the color of a circle, but it's amazing how often it grabs you.
Right, and it's not just speed. So if you try to go as fast as you can, accuracy is important. If you just try to be accurate, well, you're losing ground, you're losing score on your speed portion of it, from my understanding.
Yes, that's one of the things that, going back to an earlier question, you talked about how we evolved, is we have really discovered this performance range, these trade-offs between speed and accuracy. And we push these athletes into this really tight performance range. Obviously, you can control every impulse if you take 2-3 seconds to think about it and to control it. But we're pushing you in this range. And even within this tight reaction time, if you will, range, may say between 230, 40 milliseconds to 380 milliseconds, there are some athletes that like to play at the fast end and some athletes who like to play at the slower end, a little more cautious and want to be under control. We have ways of correcting those speed accuracy differences, and we have what we call an efficiency score. So we can account for if you're trading speed for accuracy or vice versa. But you're exactly right. I mean, that's the one thing that every athlete that we test walks out of taking this evaluation compared to a concussion test or an IQ-based test is I can't tell you how many times they get up and say, "No, that feels like the game. That you just exposed me." And because we're pushing them to the extreme, we joke that we're getting a 1 rep max for your brain. So we're pushing you to failure. So don't expect to walk out of here feeling really good about yourself, because
I did not feel good.
We're going to push you. Yeah. We're going to push you to failure.
Yeah. I really struggled with the instinctive learning. And, maybe that's just because I didn't understand what I was doing, but I'd like to think that part of that is baked into the test itself. You just don't understand it.
That is the one test where we're kind of jacking with you a little bit. It's a task where everyone gets up from that and says, I couldn't figure it out, but everybody beats chance. This is an implicit learning task. And so you're learning about patterns without even being aware you're learning about patterns. And some brains are just really quick at noticing the less obvious, noticing the subtle tendencies and patterns. Back to your question about all-stars, this was another area they excelled at. They're able to notice things, pitcher tells, pitcher tendencies, how the pitchers work in them, how the pitchers work in others. You have this you do all this pre-game work to learn their tendencies and learn their probabilities of certain pitches in certain situations. You're also having to learn how they're approaching you, and they don't want to be predictable, and so they're trying to change. So it's this chess game, and so the athletes who just have this instinctive ability to notice these subtle tendencies and patterns have an advantage. Over in the football, before he retired, Drew Brees took this evaluation, and he still represents one of the highest scores we've ever tested. I mean, he picked up and sniffed out this pattern very quickly, and in fact, you get some incorrect feedback along the way in this task, and he was really quite perturbed at the idea that he said we were wrong, and he's not incorrect, but the task itself makes you feel like you're getting duped a little bit.
It was very, very challenging, and you could definitely feel the need to really, again, just put it all together as best as you can. But I'm curious, how much of this is something we can improve upon, and how much of it is just predictive in a way for these major sports organizations to just weed us all out? Getting the results that I got, is there anything I can do with them? Any prescription of sorts, or is it just, hey, now the Seahawks really know, despite not having all the athletic qualities, Michael McKelvey will never have the brain for an NFL football player? What can be done with these tests, if anything? Because from my understanding, you can't improve reactions. Is that right?
No, that's not entirely right. And
okay.
By the way, I would say I would counter what you just described, the self-deprecating way you interpreted your results, is you probably missed your calling. So you did have a shot, but you chose this career path instead. The results, it's really interesting because we get asked all the time, early on we were asked, can you tell me if this athlete can process or not? And we'd shake our head and say, that I don't think that's the question. Everybody processes. What we're trying to help you understand is how they process. And just because you might have some areas, even several areas that are lower, that just means that they're, you're going to be less flexible and less dynamic in a lot of situations. And so if you think of a quarterback who might have lower processing areas, that doesn't mean they can't play the game. It just means that you're going to have to think carefully about how to configure their approach, your scheme. You need to play to the things they do well and try to mitigate the areas that can get them in trouble from showing up on the field. To us, it was always about fit and the value of understanding who you are, because this has been a piece that everyone has appreciated for many years in sports. but we've had no way of really measuring it and quantifying it. And so that was our main objective. And then once you kind of know how you're wired, those potential bottlenecks and sources of inconsistency and the things you do well, now you're in a much more effective position to go try to either quick fix, change your strategy, or develop and train within the context. There's been a shift over the last 20 years in our understanding of what the goal of training is. And for many years, the attempt was to raise the capacity of these systems. And we found that it's really hard to do. But what we've discovered is that few people are operating at the top end of their capacity in whatever context in which they're performing. And so a model that's emerging is, let's help people be as efficient as they can within their specific context. And you've got the rise of ecological dynamics and constraints-led approaches to training. We've been big advocates of training in the context in which you're performing and being more creative with designing cognitive interventions, cognitive training approaches, constraints that move. If you're a hitter and you have difficulties with timing, making adjustments to pitch-by-pitch variations in speed, well, getting in and taking batting practice that's 85 miles an hour right down the gut is not going to be a helpful way to improve that skill. So let's think carefully about how to structure and progress training as a hitter to make you more dynamic and able to make adjustments from the fastball to the off speed and vice versa. So I think we're moving as a field, and again, kind of moving back into the context. So brain training, where you're hitting whack-a-mole boards and doing iPad games that have no overlap with the game, is as a training tool, not as an assessment tool, but as a training tool, is really the way that we would advocate you can move the needle. I mean, we've taken hitters who chase fastballs up and out of the zone and worked on some basic concepts and principles of hooking their inhibition system. Our go system and our inhibition system are different systems in the brain. We usually train swinging, but we don't train taking very effectively. And we've been able to hook up their inhibition system through some drills where they're not even aware they're becoming more proficient at shutting down when they see that high fastball up and out of the zone. And so as we start to apply it in the game, in this context-specific way, you can start to move the needle. And as you know, Michael, small changes can have big impact in a game that's so hard. So,
yeah, especially in a game like baseball, it's on the margins. And
yeah.
so that's where I'd like to take this next. Is this 400 milliseconds, the most valuable 400 milliseconds in sports? Just for reference for everybody listening, there's 1,000 milliseconds in a second. It takes about 150 milliseconds to blink, if I'm correct. And it takes 400 milliseconds for the ball to get from the pitcher's hand roughly to the catcher's mitt. So I want to work through this in stages so I have a better understanding. And it's something that I'm just so interested in, is everything that's happening in the minutia there. So before the ball is ever released, we'll call this stage one. Pitcher is winding up, and the hitter is probably reading some cues. Well, I want to think through this first from the hitter's vantage point, if we can. So the hitter is watching that pitcher wind up. I got in the cage with a guy the other day that threw 94. I had no idea what to look for. I haven't seen a pitch since 8th grade, so I didn't know what spin or anything. I had no cues to look for. For a actual baseball player, what is occurring in their mind pre-release?
Yeah. I think even before the pitcher starts to wind up, there is some level of expectation or some approach, right? The good hitters have an approach. They're looking for a specific pitch type. Maybe they're looking for a specific pitch location or a combination. And so they have some sense. Maybe they have a sense of what this pitcher likes to throw in this situation. And so there is this chess match where, and some hitters don't like to think much about. They like to just see ball, hit ball, as we've heard. But, there's a lot of this that is you're influenced by what just happened on the prior pitch, your last at bat. So there's some of this that's happening, whether you think you're thinking about it or not. When the pitcher is in the windup, there are certainly some very specific cues. Obviously, you get moving as a hitter. You load. You get to that good hitting position on time, and there's a whole movement that you're trying to get in sync rhythmically with that pitcher's windup and cadence. That's why some of these pitchers who hesitate, or sometimes they bring their hands over their head, sometimes they don't. They're jacking with your ability to kind of get into this dance. We talk about this dance between hitters and pitchers. So there's a rhythmic getting in sync with the pitcher. There's also characteristics as the arms coming forward. You can pick up things like the best hitters can pick up whether it's a fat wrist or a skinny wrist. And so the fat wrist kind of reduces some of your pitches. It's hard you can't throw a curveball with a fat wrist. And so it reduces the type of pitch. If you skinny wrist, you're probably looking at something that's a breaking ball of sorts. So they can pick up those cues. There was some recent research in the last few years that suggested that there's an illusion. Pitchers who wind up faster, hitters facing them feel like they perceive the ball as coming out faster. So even if you keep the speed, the velocity the same, someone who winds up faster, there's a sense that the ball's going to be on you faster, versus someone who takes a very slow and you underestimate the speed. And so you can fall prey to some of this illusion. So you've got some pitchers are very slow and deliberate in their windup, and maybe that kind of lulls you into thinking something off speed's coming. Others that are very quick in their movements. So there's other cues here that are in play. And again, when you're like you said, you're in a tug of war where single digit to low double digit milliseconds matter. All of these factors can come into play.
Yeah, I'm thinking of Brian Wu, just here in Seattle and in talking with their staff a little bit, and he was drafted much lower than he should have been, but understandably had a terrible ERA in college. He was like the fourth best pitcher at Cal Poly, a small school, at least, for MLB standards. And he had a 7+ ERA, and yet the pitching staff and the scouting department, I think it was Trent Bray, went to the Mariners and said, "This is the best pitcher in the draft." And they're like, "What?" And he kept texting the GM like, "Hey, are we drafting this guy?" As the rounds went on. Eventually they drafted him in the 7th. And of course, Brian Wu ended up being, just a perennial all-star this year. Hopefully he's back, but he's a guy that when you watch him, he has this very smooth, eloquent delivery. And all of a sudden the ball just flies out at the end, much different than maybe more aggressive pitchers. And so you can see where it might be difficult to quantify that, but you can see where that can throw off a hitter's timing. Of course, when I was in the cage, anything would have thrown off my timing, just having never seen something like that. But you can definitely see that. And I think it all highlights this terribly complex structure that confused Darwin in vision. That was the one thing that he just couldn't wrap his head around, is how we evolved to build this eye, and how it's not just visual acuity. It's not 20/20 eyesight. There's so much that goes into vision. There's how much data am I getting? There's how am I interpreting that data? There's how am I acting upon that data? And of course, we're not entirely sure how all of that comes together. I think that's one of the big questions from my understanding, is just how does this all work? But that stage 1, pre-pitch, pre-release, there is already so much information from what it sounds like good hitters are drawing upon, whether they can explain it or not.
Yeah. I think, and there are certain hitters. I'll give you a great example. Met Mark McGuire a few years ago, and his son. He wanted his son to take the S2 evaluation, and we're standing behind his son a few feet back, and we're just talking a little bit. And his son starts taking a task we call perception speed, where we flash a diamond for 17 one-thousandths of a second. And the diamond's missing a corner. And then we backward mask it, which is a way for us to see how much information do you need? How much time do you need to process something that happens really fast? And it's really a fascinating way to look at you. You know, the eyes register the information, bring it to the brain. How fast can the brain unpack and process something to the point of recognizing? And we have hitters who see every single one, and we're beyond the threshold of what we thought brains could see. It's remarkable. About 4 to 5% of professional hitters get up from this task and say, yeah, that was pretty easy. I saw every one. And we just, unbelievable. But we're standing back there. I explained the task to Mark, and he starts, I hear him saying, up, left, right. And I can't even see, you know, the diamond in the middle from a few feet back. And I said, are you actually seeing these? And he goes, yeah, they're pretty clear to me. I said, that's remarkable. I said, does your son have this ability? He goes, yes. And sure enough, he scored at the 98th percentile. But I said, you realize that this is a huge advantage that you had. I said, could you see like spin patterns and, you know, information as the ball's coming out of the hand better than others? And he said, you know, I thought everybody could see this stuff until about halfway through my career, and they brought out some big cannon, had tennis balls, and they put like circles on them, color patches and numbers on it. And they started, you know, jacking up the speed to 110, 115 miles an hour. And he said, I could see most of them, and I could definitely outperform everybody else. And they were like, I was like, you can't see that? And he said, and it dawned on me that, yeah, maybe I am seeing things quicker than everyone else. And I said, yeah, we got evidence right here. You're sitting here 2 feet back and picking these up.
So cool.
You could just, again, if you don't have really fast perception speed, it just means the ball's going to travel further. You can still be a good hitter, but you may have to move back in the batter's box, take a middle-of-the-way approach. You better work really hard on pitch recognition and pitch, what the signature pitch characteristics look like and visually. But some of these brains can just see things and process things a tick quicker, and what an advantage that gives you. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to be a great hitter, because you still got to hook up all these other systems, to your point, in real time to deal with that pitch. But again, this is about advantages and disadvantages.
Right. And isolating these different
Yeah.
pieces, you know, to the best of our abilities. So, okay, so ball is now left. We'll go to stage 2. Ball is now left the hand, and it's traveling through the air. Break down this first 100 milliseconds. As far as reaction timing, how long does it take to, quote, react to something? And maybe just break down what's going on in the mind for this first 100 milliseconds of ball flight. Yeah.
So the first 100 to 150 milliseconds, you're really, there's some lag time for the brain. The eyes pick up the visual information. That information has to travel. And in fact, our visual processing centers are in the back of the brain, the occipital lobes. And so information makes it to our occipital lobes, and that's where you have very specific ensembles of neurons that are tuned to very specific aspects of visual information. Some respond to color, some respond to shape, some respond to motion and movement. And so you start to engage those systems very quickly in that early, and the information follows 2 sorts of processing streams. And broadly, we usually talk about a dorsal stream, which is more spatial motion processing, and a ventral stream, which is more recognizing what you're seeing. And so, in essence, a hitter has to make 2 rapid decisions. And again, you're not even aware how you do this, but you've got to recognize what it is and where it's moving through space. And so there's a pitch recognition and a pitch location processing where something's going to end up in space. And those kind of follow 2 different paths, and then they come back together. That creates, in an area of the brain, we think the parietal lobe, where then you're getting feedback from your motor system that helps you with timing. And so the convergence of what, where, timing, all kind of land in some parietal areas so you can make a decision about where to deliver that bat hit in time. So that early visual processing, the speed of the pitch, there's some complicated aspects of how we process speed, but there is, it seems to be that the rate at which the ball expands is the way the brain is calculating. It's called tau, optic tau. The rate of expansion tells you how fast. So if it's expanding faster, that means it's coming at you quick. If it's taken a long time, the brain is able to detect these unbelievably small deviations in the optics, the rate at which something is increasing in your vision, and you're judging speed. And so all of this convergence of this early visual processing are feeding in and helping your motor system kind of calibrate timing. If I'm going to swing, I need to know when it's going to reach, when I have to intercept this ball. And there's been some debate about whether you make the decision, is the timing decision leading the go, no-go kind of decision, or are they happening in parallel? But the early 150 milliseconds is largely devoted to this early perceptual processing.
Yeah, so it's really just information gathering. The ball is coming out. Of course, you're gathering information always, but that first 100 milliseconds, you're just kind of taking it in. I have this visual in mind of, like in the Matrix when they see everything in code, and he's seeing it for the first time. And you mentioned timing. Our relationship with time is so strange because, as we begin to get a lot more familiar and just comfortable with certain things, it's almost like things slow down. And it kind of morphs and bends this whole idea of what is time. Because to me, when I was in that cage, that thing was I barely saw it. I was able to foul off, I think, 4 pitches and hit 1 in play out of probably 15. But I couldn't time my swing. The pitches that I was fouling off, I couldn't load and really get a good swing on it. I was mostly just kind of trying to make contact, whether I was attempting to do that or not. That's all I could do. And it gets into this question of, what is time, and does time slow down for an individual as they get more comfortable doing something? Does time slow down for an athlete that is elite?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of variables that come into play here. Certainly there's a familiarity and the ability to recognize, right? If you can recognize pitches sooner, you've bought yourself some time. And so that illusion that you have more time, it benefits from the fact that you have more time to organize your motor system and organize the delivery of the bat hit, because you're having that aha recognition very early in the ball's flight. If you're recognizing pitches late, the experience is they're right on top of you. And when you get fooled, there's, that's a time gap between what you've just recognized and what you're about to do. Absolutely. The timing element is also influenced by your expectations. So there's some research that suggests if you are expecting a stimulus event and you get it, it feels bigger and slower than if you get something that you weren't expecting. It feels a little faster in kind of a reaction situation and a little smaller. And it's interesting. We've kind of, anecdotally asked hitters, hey, how does it feel when you misguess what pitch it is? And it feels like it's on top of you. It's on you quick. And then when you go in and you know what you're looking for and you get it, the hitters will all describe, man, pupil dilation and just this feeling of, oh, I'm on this, and they mash it.
Yeah. Okay. So stage 3 here. So 100 to 200 milliseconds. So we're reaching the midpoint of our distance, the 60-foot distance between the pitcher and the hitter. We're reaching that midpoint. What's going on in the mind here for a hitter?
Yeah, so it's not a serial process. So you don't say, okay, here's what pitch it is, here's where it's going, Now we got to decide, are we going to swing, yes or no? Okay, now we got to time it up. It's not this serial process in the brain. The brain there's a lot of parallel processing and overlapping processing. The visual information is being sent very early to the motor system. As I mentioned earlier, before the pitch comes out, you have this generalized activation. You're not going from 0 to 100. You're getting the motor system geared up. So you're loading the swing, you're getting to your hands to a good hitting position, you're getting your foot down on time, and your motor system is ready to go. So it's not really a go, no go. It's, do I continue what I've started? Because you've prepared your brain generally, and then when you start to get that information, now you're starting to hone in on building a particular swing solution. The bat path, where do I deliver this bat path? And so by a couple hundred milliseconds, 200, 250 milliseconds, those decisions are largely being determined. Am I going to swing? When do I swing? You're starting to run out of time to check your swing, to shut down. This is really interesting. We have a measure where we can actually compute. It's been a brilliant task in cognitive psychology, the stop signal task, and we have a variation of this that's timing and stopping, and we can actually quantify how long it takes you to stop an action that you're already starting to commit to. You haven't committed to it yet, but how quickly can you, when something changes, when you see a stimulus in your environment that tells you stop what you're about to do, abort, interrupt what you're about to do, how long that stopping decision process takes. Really fast stoppers can stop in 140, 150 milliseconds. Mm-hmm. Slower stoppers are up around 280, even 300 milliseconds. It's one of the hallmark changes in Parkinson's disease. This was some of my research at Vanderbilt showing that Parkinson's, it's not about just going. Their ability to stop when they need to stop, that stopping decision system is really prolonged by the disease process. We had some ideas about the brain systems that contribute to that. But if you take somebody who's stopping at 160 and someone who stops at 250, we did a calculation. How much longer does the person who can stop at 160 enjoy processing the pitch before they have to shut down? It was like 12 and a half feet.
Wow.
They get 12 and a half feet more of processing, and their brain can still execute a quick stopping decision and get out to their body to shut down. So these are real differences in terms of this tug of war for time, where if you're a slow stopper, you got to make a decision within the first 150 milliseconds, or you're probably not checking very often. And that's anecdotally, again, that's what we're hearing from a lot of players in pro ball and college levels, that this guy never checks. Well, that's because he has to decide to stop very early, or he's going.
Yeah, you can see where that's in a lot of different places. A running back stopping and changing course, a quarterback beginning his throw and recognizing, okay, maybe I don't want to throw there. You could see where there's carryover. I'm not sure how much you guys looked into that for football, but I'm sure a decent amount too.
Oh yeah. I mean, the whole inhibition side of elite dynamic sport performance is such an understudied but important part of play. When we talk about playing with discipline, playing with patience, playing under control, we're talking about knowing when to act and react and when not to. And withholding action, again, is a very different brain system than committing action or engaging or selecting action. And I think, we're having some fun and some success training control and discipline and inhibition in different sports capacities on the court or on the field. And I think we're just starting to tap into building brains that are much more selective, much more patient, and understanding what discipline really means.
Yeah. Yeah. Discipline. Again, we can think of these athletes that just are more disciplined in a way that, I think of it in basketball. You maybe throw one pump fake and a guy is gambling, as they say, and he's trying to read the pass, and then it's just a back door. In baseball, it's maybe the propensity to stop your swing and be a little bit better with your control of the box. I mean, there's just so many parallels that can be drawn. And again, I just get brought back to our visual systems, this thing that Darwin referred to as absurd in the highest degree possible. The founder of evolution, if he struggled with this, right, how complex is it? And, I really looked into it for the first time with the quiet eye, limited obviously from a research standpoint, just did a piece on it. But it brought up this question of the original advice I received in baseball, and the original advice most people receive when they're hitting in baseball: keep your eye on the ball. Well, that maybe works up until middle school. I'm not sure how fast we can track a ball.
That's right. Yeah.
I don't know how fast our eyes can track a ball, but from my understanding, they certainly can't track a ball that, I couldn't when I was in the cage, that's moving at a major league level. So if they're not tracking the ball, first off, I'm looking at that coach that gave me that advice. Come on, man. But also, what are they doing? Is it just our peripherals and, we're just getting as much information to swing and, we're just kind of guessing and whiffing? If we can't track this ball, what is happening?
Yeah. This has been a really fascinating aspect of understanding what are the eyes doing? Because the eyes, you're right, the eyes can't smooth pursuit a baseball. It's too fast. And so you're picking up information very early in its flight. And there's been some suggestion that the better hitters actually will wait a tick longer before they then move their eyes out to where they think it's going to cross in the hitting zone. And if you freeze frame a lot of hitters at the point of contact, their eyes are very seldom, if ever, right at the point of contact. It's usually out in front. And so you are swinging to a predicted point in space to intercept, which is absolutely fascinating. It's interesting. They've done studies where you'll occlude the ball at different points, and they'll look to say, what's disrupted your timing, your pitch recognition, your pitch location decisions, and what gets impacted the most is the location of where to swing, less so your timing. So the timing, this is argued, kind of timing is something that is processed really early on, maybe earlier than we originally thought with the visual, because it seems to be less impacted. There was another study out of a group in Japan who actually changed, they had this timing task, and you had to intercept a ball moving in space. And they changed the color of the ball at 100 milliseconds, 200 milliseconds, 300 milliseconds before contact. And they tested expert baseball players versus non-baseball players. And actually the expert baseball players had better contact, but they were worse at telling you what color it changed to at the end. And so their argument, which is an interesting one, was that the baseball hitters are really prioritizing what's processing along this dorsal stream, this interceptive processing. It's like when you watch those scenes and they have somebody in a gorilla suit walking behind and nobody sees. That's kind of what's happening here, that all this processing focus is on the spatial interception of this ball, that you lose some of this late visual ability to detect any late visual characteristics. Pretty interesting stuff. Yeah.
Really, really interesting perception in a way, and I'm brought back to the System 1 and System 2 and the challenges that companies have had with self-driving, tasks that we really thought would be easy. And I think in a lot of ways, people assumed that it would be the perception would be the easy part, as we were automating and building things out. And, the reasoning would be maybe the more challenging. But we found, of course, that self-driving is really hard to model. It's really hard to model these visual structures and predict, what people are going to do and, how things are all moving. And when you first start driving, it's very much a system to task. You're thinking through everything,
Yeah.
right? When I was in the cage, I was really kind of thinking through, it wasn't system one. It wasn't maybe as automatic as I would hope, but over time it becomes more automatic and we can do many things while we drive. Just like a basketball player can dribble and do all these different other things while they're dribbling. A baseball player, is able to do multiple things while they're playing, baseball. They're able to, have a pitcher, for example, is able to have all these different thoughts in his head of, okay, time and score, and I guess not time, but, where's everybody on the base paths and the pitch count, the situational awareness of everything. And, I guess it's a question of how much of system 2 for an athlete can become system 1. I don't even know if that's a cognitive question, but like driving.
Yeah.
Is it possible that, all these system 2 tasks just become more system 1, or is it just, hey, we kind of have these cognitive ceiling, as you mentioned, and it's more, just getting familiar with the muscle memory of sorts. I don't know if that's a good way of framing it, but.
No, I think there's a lot of examples. I worked with Gordon Logan, who's at Vanderbilt for many years and has been a pioneer in kind of thinking about this hierarchical structure between these more deliberate, slow control processes and these fast, more automatic type processes. And, I remember a paper he wrote about just something as basic as typing. And we type at the level of the word. And so the word tells you, your fingers kind of know what to do if you give me the word. And if you start thinking about the individual letters, it really interferes with your typing speed. And he had this great little example where anyone can do this. You just type a quick paragraph as fast as you can, all the letters. Even if you're a slow typer, you'll get a time. And then do it again, but only type the letters underneath your right hand or associated with your right hand. And you're typing roughly half the letters, but what happens to your reaction time? Oh, it miserably slows. It's uncomfortable. It's because we're not supposed to intervene at the level of these automatic movements and these sequences that the brain has laid down. We have these hierarchies of control. I think I'm inclined, and I got to start thinking about this because you've brought this up. And you get all the credit. This system 3 may be this system that is monitoring and adapting system 1 faster and more, dynamically than what we typically associate with system 2, where you have the benefit of a lot of time. System 1 just doesn't go on without any kind of, it's not passive, right? Some of it is automated and automatic, but the quarterback still has to change the arm slot when the defender comes at a weird angle. You have to be able to override it and shift and adapt. So maybe you're onto something here with this system 3 thinking. So we'll give you credit for system 3. That's this dynamic adjustment, flexibility, adaptability over system 1. And
there might be something there. Okay, continuing our process here. So we're now into stage 4, 200 milliseconds to 300 milliseconds in our pitch journey. What is occurring here for the hitter now? Are they starting to make that decision of swing or don't swing, or has that already occurred?
Yeah, I think it's probably in that range, that 200 to 300 range. If it's late at the end, you might get some, hesitation, some half swings because you're running out of time. But yeah, you've made some decision. You've already started to identify when you need to swing and where you need to swing. You're running out of time to shut things down if you have to. There is evidence that you can make some late adjustments to your bat path and your swing. And so some of those late adjustments are being, calibrated and identified late in the process. But you're getting close to this point of no return. Okay.
And then the final stage here, stage 5 in this case. We are 300 to 400 milliseconds. So this is to the point of contact. Is this all just translation at this point? Is it all just, hey, I got all the information I can get, there's not enough time anymore, and it's just, how do I translate? What's going on?
Yeah, it probably depends on the pitch, right? So if you get a breaking ball or an off speed, you've been given a few extra tens of milliseconds. And so if you're fooled and you're sitting hard fastball and you're out in front and you know, they start to sit down and try to fight it off. I mean, there's some unbelievable hitters who just have this knack for fighting off pitches.
Josh Naylor's one, I think.
Oh, unbelievable. Yeah. It's uncanny how they're able to make these little adjustments at the end to see in the next pitch. So I think there's some processing that's going on, especially on pitch. Fastball, it's probably already in the glove, or it's getting there close. What's remarkable is the estimate of how accurate your timing has to be. And so there's been estimates anywhere from 7 to 9 milliseconds plus or minus up to 20 milliseconds. If you're off in your timing from this optimal, point of contact, you're fouling it off, you're missing it if you're out there closer to 20, 30 milliseconds off in your timing. It's unbelievable how the human brain is able to make these kind of interceptive decisions and processing. And, obviously you're hitting the round ball with a round bat, and so you've got a few centimeters of air up or down, and you're popping it up, fouling it back, getting on top of it. Just the spatial temporal precision is just unbelievable. You can think of other sports where you're having to make this type of fast product, maybe goalies in hockey sometimes. There's certainly in every sport, there are moments where things are happening at this speed, but in terms of every pitch being in this kind of a fast demanding, it's hard to think of another sport that's as demanding.
That's why it stands out so much to me is, it's 400 milliseconds is just such a short period of time, and there's just so much that's packed into that. Again, I just go back to, if you're good in that 400 milliseconds, if you're great, if you're elite, you're worth millions. I struggle to find anything else that is comparable to that. And so it's always been so interesting to me in that way. And I had an athlete that I thought of, before this, that I wanted to ask you about, because I think a lot of people can relate to this. He's a guy that was not the smartest in the general sense. He got made fun of a lot. Coaches thought he was dumb, but he was a guy that just everything he did, it seemed fluid and effortless and almost perfected from a form standpoint. His jump shot was just fluid, effortless, and basketball wasn't even his primary sport. His golf swing, I remember golfing with him for the first time, and I was blown away at just how beautiful his golf swing was. And I asked him, how much do you play golf? He said, 4 or 5 times a year. And he was dead serious. And he's a scratch golfer. And golf was maybe like his 5th sport. And I started wondering, a few things. We know we can overthink things. Is there a benefit for some athletes that they're just not thinking and they're just doing? And second, again, getting back to that question of just, are there different forms of genius? Like, is there something to this guy to where he can just look at something and do it? And he can't explain himself, but you or me or a lot of people would maybe struggle more to emulate something that we see.
Yeah, 100%. I think you're exactly right. That's the way we see it. There's a lot of different ways to get to genius, and there are, like you're describing, the hand-eye coordination, the ability to control and sculpt your motor reactions and motor movements and sequence them and get into rhythm with effortlessly. It all involves the brain. So what are we talking about there? We're not talking about something you capture with traditional measures of IQ. I think IQ has its place in capturing some kinds of thinking. I'll give you another example. we have talked recently with some day trader groups, and their pain point is, look, we get all these Ivy League geniuses that are all incredibly proficient in mathematics, but some of them struggle as day traders. Some of them are really gifted. What are those variables that separate? They're equivalent in terms of the traditional intelligence, but there are differences in their ability to tolerate risks and ability to control impulses at the wrong time, the right time, see patterns, process patterns. And so we're talking about ways to unlock some of these other separators that have nothing to do with intelligence, but how you manage in this very time-constrained, high-pressure environment. So I think you're exactly right. I mean, that was back to our initial example. We've got teams that are testing players down in their baseball teams in the Dominican Republic, testing these youngsters that might have 2 or 3 years of formal education and a lot of variability in their backgrounds and nutrition and hygiene and support structures. And some of these athletes, would struggle in a third grade class, but we test them and they're testing at the 84th percentile compared to professional athletes, and they have this unbelievable gift on the ball field that is maturing, at 15, 16 years of age, despite all these other differences. So I think you're right. I think to pigeonhole human beings according to one approach to measuring, reasoning, and thinking is really stifling and missing the mark. There's so many other dimensions to human performance, and like I said, musicians and artists and athletes that are just, is that intelligent? Yeah, absolutely. It's unbelievable what they're able to do, and that their brains are every bit a part of driving those abilities.
Yeah. There's so many things I can think of, just from like a coaching standpoint, to where, coaches would benefit from something like this, as they, maybe view certain aspects of an athlete as laziness or lack of attention to detail. We know that can be a result of just not putting enough energy or effort into paying attention to the details. But we also know that we are very much, wired differently. And there are people that struggle with the details just inherently much more than somebody else that can just kind of pick it up and remember it. And yeah, it kind of like, it brings me back to this question of just how a team or how players can take their S2 score, for example, and maybe improve upon it. Can you improve on your S2 score, or is it a matter of just, hey, I got my results here and now it's just, what do I do with them?
Yeah. No, so the brain is a moving target as we mature. So I have a 14-year-old son at home who plays baseball and plays football, and I test his cognitive skills on the baseball evaluation once a year. And I want to know, hey, where are your capacities this year? Right. And things have changed over the last few years. He's 14 now. I tested him when he was, I probably started earlier than I needed to, but I was curious. So you ought to see the stuff I put him through. But every year I can see in an area, hey, this still represents an area we've got to work on. It still shows up in your play, but hey, let's try to move the needle a little bit and prepare this. And who knows, the brain system may kick in here in the next couple of years, and you've done all this foundational work to really leverage that when it starts to come online. And other systems have been strong, and so we've leaned into those and build confidence. And hey, you got to trust yourself here. And we've pushed those systems to the extreme in a way that he's definitely taking advantage and leaning into those, and then trying to mitigate the frustrations. Yeah, I think coaches, why would you not want to know everything you can about your athlete to get as much out of your athlete, to understand what the pain points are going to be, to try to optimize their play? I mean, we have so many coaches talk with us about how This has helped them change their attitude when a player is struggling, from assuming it's efforts, assuming it's laziness, like you were just talking about, to wait a minute, I need to rethink the way I position or approach this player, or maybe they're not in the right position. We like them physically in this position, but cognitively, they're going to do much better when we're simplifying things or focusing the things that this athlete does well at this position. And so for us, it's about fit. It's about understanding reducing uncertainty and aligning who this athlete is with how you expect and want them to play. And some athletes might not be a good fit for your system. Had a great conversation with Jason Kidd several months ago. We were testing his son. His son's a baseball player. We were talking about this in basketball, and he was conveying lament at the fact that you have athletes all the time in the NBA who fit the bill physically, athletically, but they struggle in a system, and then you end up abandoning them. They go to another system, and he thought this cognitive piece was probably a big reason why they find themselves in a system that leans into their strengths, even if they know it or not, and mitigates their weaknesses. And all of a sudden, he said, they're an all-star. Yeah. And he says, how does that work? And I said, exactly. We're just trying to, this is a piece of the puzzle. Turns out brains are pretty important, and we're trying to just reduce that uncertainty and help you better align, you and the player align with the expectations and how to move forward to optimize their play.
Yeah, I did a piece with Sumer Sports on entanglement, and the challenge of predicting players as they change environments in football, because it was always something that I was so curious about. I was like, why is this guy, so good in this environment? They move to another environment and he's not good, and vice versa. And we see that with quarterbacks. We see that with all these different positions, and we find that the positions that are more isolated are easier to predict, such as wide receivers. They're out on an island, away from the fallout zone of chaos in a way. And because of that, it's much more correlated year to year what their production is going to be. Even if they change environments, It's much more correlated. Randy Moss being perhaps the greatest example of that.
Yeah.
He played for 6 quarterbacks. He played for more than that, but he had, I think it was a minimum number of like 250 pass attempts from 6 different quarterbacks. He played so long, and you look at each quarterback and they significantly improved with him. So it's a challenge of entanglement, of maybe an element of that entanglement. And the reason why it's so hard to predict how a player will do in one environment versus the other is their cognitive capacity and skill set is better in one system versus another system. And I also wonder, as you talk through that, how much of it is development? Baseball is just so hard to predict who's going to be good. I think I would guess the most challenging from a hitting standpoint to know who's going to develop. And you just have to imagine 16-year-olds when they're getting signed in the Dominican, 18-year-olds, even 21-year-olds. A big part of that has to be their brains still moving around and developing, right?
Yeah, for sure. And, again, you're trying to take performance at an inferior level of competition and difficulty and project what it's going to look like, when you're facing the dudes in the big leagues. It's unbelievable, and there's a lot of steps between there. Mm-hmm. And, being good at anything is multidimensional. So this is just one piece of the puzzle. I mean, the physical, we've seen athletes with unbelievable cognitive skills, unbelievable physical and athletic capabilities, and the psychological bucket, the inability to regulate your emotions, anxiety that just hampers your ability to play with confidence and unleash these skills, express these skills and play, has really pulled the rug out from underneath the athlete. And there's so many factors, but you're right. I mean, we definitely are being utilized in the selection process as a piece of the puzzle. If you get a kid who has high cognitive capacity, it doesn't mean that they're going to be a big leaguer, But I tell you what, it means that they have the ability to adapt to the speed and complexity of the game as you go up the levels, at least from a decision-making standpoint. They have a system that can be configured with the right training and practice, and if everything else falls in line, they have the requisite processing ability to deal with the most demanding, feat in sports.
Yeah, I think of it almost like in Madden, you have all the different attributes, right? And you maybe have several more that you would add on in the cognitive space that go up to 99 overall, right? But still, even there's complexity. I'm sure if you have an outstanding impulse control score, well, you might not just ever take any risks. You might not sling it when you need to. So there's probably more nuance to that than just, I scored 100% on distraction control or impulse control. That means that I can just make the best decisions. I'm sure there's a give and take there that, again, a coach could maybe say, okay, he's 99 in impulse control. Maybe he's just Dylan Gabriel and he's not going to take any shots. And we got to get him to look up to that next level, because it's very difficult to win if you don't make big plays in the NFL.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. I mean, we look at a couple combinations. We look at combinations of scores to kind of infer some of those other characteristics. We have a secondary measure in football, for example, that's a speed accuracy trade-off. And so exactly what you were talking about earlier, where if you push for speed, you're a little more tolerant of making errors, or do you tend to focus and prioritize in these quick decision situations being accurate and, slow down a little bit? And if you couple that, if you get somebody who's the 98th percentile in accuracy and maybe 12th percentile in speed, that doesn't mean they're not fast. It just means that, hey, when they're in these quick decision situations, they're erring on the side of being accurate, and they have high impulse control, so they're a little overly inhibited. They're quick to engage their inhibition system. You're exactly right. They're the athlete that probably needs to be
they need Bruce Arians.
They
need Bruce Arians.
That's exactly right.
To say, if you don't risk it,
And there's ways to, and and that's what we would encourage is, look, and you can't just tell them, hey, you got to throw. You actually got to practice that. You got to put them in situations and force them to be a little more aggressive, a little more risky, and build that comfort about winning, about knowing when to be a little more aggressive and creative with your play versus being more controlled, because there's situations you got to toggle between control and playing a little more spontaneous and aggressive. And so those kinds of experiences and training can really help an athlete overcome some of those intrinsic kind of sources of hesitation.
Yeah. And I'm brought to another question on the Flynn effect. Is this just the Flynn effect? And we're going to see, because I think of hitters, their ability to process now faster pitches. Pitchers weren't throwing this fast 10 years, 15, 20 years ago. I mean, the fastball has increased, I think, from the high 80s. Maybe 25 years ago was in the high 80s, the average fastball, to where it's like 94, 95 now. So that's significantly faster. And there's more movement on the pitch, and hitters, if you look at run production, are right where they were about 10, 15 years ago. And so if that's the case, are we improving cognitively, or is it just our environment is shaping us in a way to where we're getting better cognitively? And it's kind of that Flynn effect of sorts with IQ, where it was, gradually going up, and I don't know if it's still going up. Last few years are questioning that.
Yeah.
But is that the case where we're seeing cognition, speeded cognition, athletic cognition increasing, or is it, I guess, what's going on there?
Yeah, that we've had lots of discussions and debates about that, and along the lines you're talking about, where are we fundamentally shaping these systems to be more dynamic and rise to the occasion, if you will, or was this always kind of in our capability, but we kind of adjust to the constraints and adjust to the situational demands? My mentor, Ted Bayshore, in graduate school played professional baseball, and he played at UCLA. He was actually one of the youngest starting linebackers, but he's also on the baseball team at UCLA, and then he was drafted and played a few years of professional baseball. And I mean, that was back in the late 1960s, early 70s, and he still talks about, hey, we had our guys that can bring it, up close to triple digits, and he played with Nolan Ryan, and he always says something. He says, look, we could all catch up to fastballs, just because guys weren't throwing it, but the guys that came in that threw smoke and that's all they threw were largely fastballs. He said we really didn't have much of a difficulty catching up to them. It's always been the guys that can paint the edges, that can mix their velocities. And you're right. Now we've got, spin patterns, different pitches, and, curvilinear dynamics are coming into play, which really puts a premium on these adaptable skills in that 400 milliseconds to be able to make those adjustments. But, I don't think the jury's out yet. We're also punching out a lot more than we did, right?
Yeah.
The strikeout rate. So we're kind of, is this a trade-off,
Yeah.
As well? We're being a little more loose and loosey-goosey, if you will, with our decision-making and what we're willing to go after. And the trade-off is, well, you're gonna swing and miss more. You're gonna
changing the angle to try and hit more homers. Yeah. It's a big question of just like how much more room is there, there. But you guys also worked with some special forces.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that?
Oh yeah. We were just a few years into our sports when we got a knock on the door, so to speak, from special forces, and they monitor technology and application of technology at the sports level, because they're obviously operators are performing in extreme environments, fast time structures, changing scenes. And obviously the stakes are a little different. Instead of walking back and sitting on the bench after a punch out, these are more serious potential consequences. And they have always wanted to push their operators as hard as they can to prepare them for the military theater. And their interest was in, again, understanding how operators were wired differently, so they could use this to build their teams with complementary skills, or really load up on certain skills because to fit the operational demands, and then use this as a way to tailor and customize training and development at an individual operator level. And so that's been really rewarding to get their response, and they like it 'cause they get tested in all sorts of ways, and sometimes they get feedback, sometimes they don't. They really like this because this, we're pushing your 1 rep max in these brain systems, and so I think we've only lost 1 or 2 controllers because they got a little irritated during the examination and threw it across the room. But these guys are intense. They're equally as competitive as athletes. So, and you hit turn and say, "Sorry, I threw that." Yeah, that's okay. I got another one here. No problem.
Yeah,
you want to throw this one?
Yeah.
You want to throw another one? Yeah.
That's great. So how did they do? Were they? Because I'm curious how athletes and special forces, versus non-athletes, how are they doing in the speed of cognition tests, comparatively?
Yeah, and there's, again, a lot of individual differences. Unlike sports, in special forces, it's hard. There's not a lot of gold standards, right? So they, and let me be careful what I mean by that. In terms of, like in baseball, who's an all-star. And you have all these metrics of in-game performance, and so there's not a lot of
that makes sense.
Carefully circumscribed metrics out there in the battlefield in real time. So
you're not going for death toll.
Exactly.
And even if you are, there's a survivorship bias, right? With the pilots, as Kahneman pointed out that, well, they're maybe not the best dog fighters. They just got lucky a few times.
Yeah, exactly. And the situations, are so variable and different, and it's just not the same as playing, in a constrained space and constrained time sport. That said, the technology is allowing for a lot more sophisticated tracking of decision making and performance. It is hard across the board to elevate the stakes and create the same sense that you are when you are in the military theater.
I can only imagine.
We hear that. I mean, it's loud and clear.
I feel it just playing paintball, man.
Yeah,
that's right. I played paintball a few times, and my heart felt like it was going to explode out of my chest. I had to remind myself I'm not going to die, but I can only imagine when the bullets are real.
Yeah. So we spend a lot of time talking about how do we get as close as we can, realizing that we're never really going to fully capture. And there's things you can do to create strong impulses, and it's something. Impulse control is something I've studied in my lab for. I can bring any human being on the planet into my lab and make you, miserably impulsive and push you around just by changing little dynamics of the task and the constraints, So we talk a lot about how to elevate the training in very specific ways that are going to. The ultimate goal is to help that operator be as effective as he or she can be in that environment, and to be prepared for those unpredictabilities, uncertainties, those sudden, unexpected changes. And there are ways you can create the environment and create the situation to kind of push on some of those. But it starts with, kind of knowing, what they do well and leaning into that. And again, what might get them in trouble sometimes, might lead to some struggles, and then pushing on that a little bit.
Yeah. There's still, so much, I guess, to explore and learn and test, but that's part of, I think, what makes it fun. But I really appreciate your time today. This was awesome. And yeah, I think I'd love to do this again. There's so much more I could ask you, but I really appreciate your time today here, Scott.
Oh, it's been great. I've enjoyed great questions. And I agree with you. When Brandon and I got into this, we're kind of on the front end of the edge of the wave, if you will, when sports was starting to ask questions about the brain. And I really think we're just at the tip of the iceberg. I think the next 20, 30 years there's so much we're going to learn about training and decision-making and processes. It's a fun time to be a geeky scientist in sports. But, to the extent that we're contributing to that and helping athletes be successful, helping coaches make better use of their players, and it's a fun place to be. I'm with you though. We're just scratching the surface.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks again, and we'll have to talk soon.
Yeah, that's great. Appreciate it.